Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this Thursday, February 25th edition of ATS Radio. I'm your host, Adam Burke. I'll be joined today by Brad Powers, professional bettor and handicapper over at bradpowersports.com. We'll chat FCS college football and some college hoops here on today's show. But before we dig too far into that, my 2021 MLB betting guide going up here today over at ats.io. All 15 AL teams up before the show. Going to have everything else up throughout the afternoon here over at the website. And also make sure we get that PDF uploaded with all of the pages of the MLB betting guide. It is a long read, but a lot of great information to get you ready for the 2021 MLB season. I'll talk about that more on tomorrow's show as I fly solo to finish out this week on ATS Radio. Over at the website, along with the individual pages and previews for my MLB betting guide, coverage of college basketball, the NBA, the NHL, lots of stuff going on over there, to say the least. Make sure you download the ATS app, which you can find in the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. Full article integration from the website, a bet tracker, and odds screen, helpful handicapping bells and whistles like a stats database. You can subscribe to the premium model. All kinds of good stuff in that ATS app, a very powerful tool to have at your fingertips here with all of the sports going on. We bring in today's guest, that is professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from bradpowersports.com. And what's going on there, buddy?
Not much, man. How you doing?
Doing well, man. I'm busy as hell. Editing and finishing up the guide and working yesterday for about 18 hours. And then a quick turnaround here to get back and finish formatting and all that for the guide. So definitely busy. I'm sure it's just a usual workload for you though.
Nah, maybe not quite. And you said that guide's over 1,000 pages?
It's over 119,000 words. It's 270 something pages in PDF.
Holy cow, on 30 teams.
30 teams, all the futures, the World Series, ALNL pennant, some player futures stuff.
That's unbelievable.
Breakdown of the stats that I use. So pretty comprehensive guide, I guess I would say, over there at the website for everybody to check out. And you do a lot of comprehensive work, especially for FBS college football when that season rolls around. But we're talking FCS here on today's show. And initial thoughts coming out of last week, what we saw, what you think we can expect to see, how things went from a betting standpoint, in terms of market moves and all of that. What did you see last weekend, Brad?
Well, personally, on the betting front, I got my ass kicked. So there's that. So we'll see, how much I want to be in. I can't take too many of those with, before I, you got to know when to fold them, like, Mr. Rogers said so eloquently on his song. But, I was very happy with, beating the market. Kind of no surprise there, at least as far as I'm concerned. But I would expect better results. If you're beating the market by 5 points per game on every bet, you should eventually come out on top. But I think generally speaking, there wasn't a ton of surprises. I think from a macro level, lower scoring so far. We've seen some conservative play. To put in perspective, unders in the first 10 games are 7-3. Not a big enough sample size, but one stat I did find intriguing was no team out of the 20 that have played so far has had a passing game of more than 300 yards. So, maybe some early season weather played a little bit of a role in that, but we've seen some conservative lower scoring games so far. So I would tread lightly wanting to, fire in a bunch of overs even this week.
Do you feel like the opening lines adjusted to that, or did the market kind of, mold them and shape them into where they should be?
I don't think the market, totals really didn't get posted until game day. So I don't think they got shaped real good. The sides got some play. I thought, I think it's a sharper market, not necessarily opening lines. I think that's a really soft market, but let's face it. The public's not betting a Wofford Chattanooga game. They're going to bet the big basketball game. I think I told somebody on Sunday, because they were questioning the line move in one of the FCS games on a Sunday. I'm like, look, the public's not betting the FCS game. They're betting the Ohio State Michigan basketball game today. They're betting the NBA. They're not betting the FCS. If there's anybody moving lines in the FCS, I would consider it professional money. It's tough to get after a lot of the totals if they're not going to get posted until game day. Lower limits. I will give Circa credit. They were on game day. They were allowing as much as 3,000 on a side at one book. That's a decent, really decent sized bet for an FCS game. But we'll see. I guess I'm not seeing too much movement after the numbers got hit pretty good off the openers within an hour or two of them getting released this week. I mean, I've been tracking them the last 2 days, Adam. I've seen hardly any movement in the market the last 2 days on these FCS games.
Well, and of course, like any other market, it will shape up. It will get a little bit more efficient as we go forward here, as we get some more data, as we get some more data points. And the thing that's really interesting, I think, about the FCS is that, you do get some exceptionally low totals here. And we've got one on Saturday with Northern Iowa and Youngstown State, a total of 39. I mean, unless you've got a game played in a hurricane or something like that in FBS, you don't really see totals that low. I know we saw a team like Colgate, for example, a couple of years ago, where their totals were just anemic, some in the mid-30s. Do you feel like people are just going to, look at that and go, well, it's a college football game. It's got to go over?
Maybe. Come game day, maybe we'll get some of that. But, I mean, I didn't bet. I certainly did. I'm not willing to go out there and bet the over, even at this extremely low total. I mean, after watching, I had bets involving both teams last week, and nothing I took away from those games said, that these teams are capable, or at least me running to the window to bet the over in this one. You do get some extremes in this instance, but I think in this case, it's deserved on both fronts. Youngstown State offensively looks very challenged. I mean, they only had one first down in the first half against North Dakota State. Northern Iowa's defense is just as good as North Dakota State. And then Northern Iowa offensively looked really anemic against South Dakota State, had a couple of their key players injured. It's deserved. Let's just put it that way. I think I made the total like 40 or 41. And look, if we're dealing with a more efficient market and I got a bigger sample size, sure, maybe a small bet on the over. But again, 38.5 is not screaming over for me.
So as we take a look at the rest of the card here, and there are some more teams, there are some more games, some more conferences kind of getting going here this week. I know we're going to see a little bit more from the Southland Conference being one of them here. They've had a couple of games, I think, so far, but they're adding a few more here this week. Obviously, we've got a lot of the teams that we saw last week in action. So anything stand out to you here? Anything that maybe you've had a price grab on so far, or something that you're kind of considering to see what the market does?
Well, believe it or not, and I'll post these eventually this week, later, probably like Friday or something. But I made 17 bets, so I'm not afraid. Even though I had a bad week last week, I'm not afraid to get. I think I can make a better power rating than the market, at least at this point. So we'll see. I'm ahead of the market by 16 of those 17 bets right now. So I think hopefully that should be positive EV. I'll tell you my biggest bet was Missouri State. I laid 2.5 in their game against Western Illinois. It's up to 5 now. I would still make a bet on Missouri State. The mispricing for me, then you're going to see a Missouri State team that's 1-13 in their last 14 games. And you're going to say, how in the hell can you lay points on the road with that bad of a team? The reality is they're not that bad of a team. I think the market is treating them like that 1-13 team. The reality is this is a team that nearly beat Central Arkansas not once but twice in the fall. Central Arkansas is a top 25 FCS team, and Missouri State outplayed them in both games. They were combined -8 in turnovers in both of those games and still almost won them. So if they can clean up the turnovers a little bit, Missouri State with a bunch of FBS transfers, Bobby Petrino's their new coach, coached them in the fall. I mean, this could be an average FCS team coming from one of the worst FCS teams to an average one. I mean, you're talking a significant power ratings upgrade that I don't think the market has grasped yet. On the other side, it's a Western Illinois team that was 1-11 last year and did lose to Missouri State last year. I mean, that's one bet that I'm pretty comfortable with. Even after the line move, I've still up to 6.5. I would lay it here with Missouri State.
So you said you're ahead of the market in 16 of the 17
Yeah.
bets that you've placed here so far, which is awesome. And, obviously we hope that that plays itself out the way that, we all think it should. But with that in mind, are you just looking at, taking your line value, something like this Missouri State game, for example? You did say that you would play it up to 6.5. I don't know if it's going to get to 7 or higher, but are you just holding all of those positions? Are you thinking about playing back at any of them just because this is kind of an inefficient, sort of maybe a higher variance market at this point in time?
Great question. It depends on how much they move, but I already have two bets on one game on both on two different sides. I made the Furman VMI game. I made the line 21, and to show you how inefficient the opening numbers are on these FCS games, I laid 18 with Furman and I took 24.5 with VMI. In this game, I made the line 21. That's where it's at right now. So that's already a game where I have my preferred position is Furman, but I did take a little bit back. Actually, I took a little bit. Furman was my second of the two bets. I took VMI at the start. I'm like, well, 24.5 is just a little high there. So I took a small bet on VMI, and then I couldn't believe another book after the line had already been out at plus 24.5. I was a little surprised somebody opened minus 18. So that's an example of something you just don't get at the FBS level. That I did take two different sides of that one, a little bit of an overlay there where, it's not like a game of the year bet at the FBS level where, I bet it several months prior and then I just come back on a different line. That's just, within a matter of hours having that big of a difference and disparity. The other ones, it'll kind of depend. I'm maybe exposed a little bit too much on Missouri State compared to my other bets this week. If the line crossed through 7, then maybe I'll buy back some Western Illinois a little bit there. Good question, because when you're 1-6 with a ton of closing line value to start off, Adam, you start to guess yourself, hey, I got all these, supposedly great bets and I'm still losing. Probably time to take off, close to kickoff, bite off some pieces on the other side.
Well, it'd certainly be great if closing line value was a guarantee of winning, because I know you beat the market consistently across all the sports that you play. And as we've talked about before here on the show, look, that's all you can really control is, get the best of the number that you can, hope it plays out, especially when you have that line value. I guess you could, sort of do what we just talked about, maybe partial hedge back, something like that. I don't know if anyone's offering live betting on FCS here at this point in time.
I didn't see any last week.
Yeah, I don't know if that'll be a thing.
At least onshore. I think in faraway places at some random books you could find it.
And especially, too, you still have some pretty crammed college basketball Saturdays going on.
Oh, yeah.
And, several more of those where the books are far more concerned about those, and you can certainly understand why. But, it is always an interesting discussion. If you hold that line value, if you hope what's perceived to be a good bet is going to come through for you, or if you kind of play back a little bit. And, of course, you don't have to play the full thing back. If you like one side more than another, you got that side for a higher bet amount. And I think that's the way that you probably play a lot of these things here in the FCS. So definitely going to be interesting to see if, you have better fortunes there with your line value. And certainly I hope that you do. Any other games on the card here that you want to make sure that we touch on?
I think a game that I'm waiting on, and this is one where I haven't bet yet, but I think there's been an overreaction. The South Dakota State, North Dakota game. North Dakota, had one of the biggest surprises last week. They upset Southern Illinois. I was on North Dakota, bet that game. It was my only winner was North Dakota, but just to show you that, I'm not tied to any sort of team. I wasn't that impressed, even though they covered by, almost 4 touchdowns. North Dakota was +5 in turnovers. That didn't overly impress me in that game against the Southern Illinois. This week, they're taking on a legitimate South Dakota State team that's off a big road win against Northern Iowa. Really proved themselves with a third-string quarterback down in the fourth quarter to go for a game-winning drive. South Dakota State really impressed me last week. So this is one where I think the market, we'll see if they continue to buy on North Dakota. If it gets down to 7, I'm going to fire away on the Jackrabbits here. That's a game where I'm anticipating maybe some more money on North Dakota, and I'm going to fade it.
Yeah, I think it's a good position, especially when you consider too, as you said, like it's an inefficient market. And what's going to happen here in these early games will probably, result in an overreaction. It will be one of those things where this market will have a lot of knee jerk reactions to it simply because you get a lot of people in this thing that don't normally pay attention to this thing. So if
Yep.
you can find some of those mispricings, as you said, from one data point or a couple of data points that, don't look particularly sustainable. And I don't know how easy information is to find here for the FCS. I don't know what you get in terms of statistical deep dives anywhere or anything like that. Have you seen, opportunities to take advantage of some box score study and just kind of, looking at what happened in the game, turnover margin, stuff like that?
Uh, Probably not yet. You need more data. I like teams having like multiple games that are misleading. Then you can really line it up. But I did play some already. I thought, last week. Well, I'll say this. Austin P was a game that I bet on. I lost with Austin P. They outgained their opponent by more than 200 yards. I mean, really, it was turnovers and also specifically horrific special teams. Had a couple of punts blocked, fumbled punts, and whatnot. So that's a team that, not necessarily value this week against Tennessee State, but Austin P had a very misleading loss last week's where I might be looking to take advantage of that. I mean, there's not a lot of statistical, it's not, readily available like the FBS or the NFL sort of say. There are a couple sites, hell, I'll even, promote, former employer of mine, Phil Steele does a good job. They post up all the game by game stats for the FCS, real easy to read. And I think you can find some value if you just go to their team pages. They do a really good job. And, I think over the course of the season, if you can line up some of that, of course, there'll be some value. One quick thing that I do want to mention, what I'm really anticipating is this market is going to it'll get as big as it can get come April. Because, what are people going to bet after the NCAA tournament? You got the NBA playoffs, and that's kind of a hot and cold. A very divisive type of league right now. I think you're going to go from just guys like me betting FCS to the public will get involved come April. So that's, me anticipating maybe some overreaction, big time overreaction will probably come in April.
So along with watching your bets and any future bets that you may make here over the course of this week, what else are you looking for? Are you looking for consistency? Are you looking for teams to improve off of that first game to show that, after finally getting on the field, having a week's worth of practice, they can go out there and look a little bit better?
Yep.
I guess sort of, your what to watch for type thing here for this weekend from a betting standpoint.
I want to see how the totals do that I already mentioned, because a lot of teams are starting off this week, and I'll see if that trend continues to hold up, because even more teams start even next week. It's kind of a stacked, it's not like everybody's opening up the same week. So that'll be one thing I look at. Game under belt is what I'm very interested to see how much of an impact that is, because traditionally at the FBS level over the last 20 years, people overreact to game under belt. What do I mean by that? You've already played a game, your opponent hasn't. In the last 20 years at the FBS level, if you bet on the team that's already played a game, you're actually 45% against the spread. So, I've always said this, it's better to have game film on your opponent than to actually have played a game. However, we saw one example last week where it was horrific, where Tarleton State had played a game already. New Mexico State hadn't, and not only hadn't played a game in over 400 days. It was a big time negative for New Mexico State. So I'm anxious to see how game under their belt, holds out this week. And we got a ton of examples. We'll have a good data size as far as that is concerned. Haven't seen the market, necessarily, really overreact to it, but teams like McNeese State has taken a ton of money. They've already played. Nicholls State, who won a game 87-3 last week, they've taken a lot of money. No surprise there that the team that's already played and been impressive has taken some money. We'll see. Traditionally, it's been a negative. Last week was such, a big loss for me. that it's made me, less inclined to bet against a team that already has a game under the belt, because it's such a unique season where, it's not like they haven't played a game for 8 months. We're talking they haven't played a game in more than a year at this point.
87-3.
Yeah, Nicholls State won 87-3 over opponent. They missed 3 extra points too. They could have put a 90 spot.
Jesus, how do you score 87 points? Like, were they like +8, +9 in turnover margin, or just not stopped at all?
They're playing it. You couldn't really bet the game because it was a non-Division I team that they're playing. But yeah, I really didn't dive into that box score too much. What I took away was people, because it was a headline grabbing type of final, that I just knew I had to bet Nicholls State because everyone would want to bet Nicholls State in their next game.
21.5 point favorite here for Nicholls State as they take on Lamar. And you know what? I'm happy for all the coaches and all the players and everything that the FCS is doing this. I'm happy that it's going to be in the spotlight here in the spring as well. Of course, it gives us some good betting opportunities. I don't really have too much time to dig into it right now because I'm doing baseball and, of course, all the college basketball stuff. But it is good to hear your thoughts on it here, Brad, and I'm sure that we'll be able to continue with that as we go forward here. Something that's a little bit of a departure from college basketball, which will obviously take center stage and really has taken center stage for the most part on this show, on a lot of shows as well. Because, look, the thing of it is, conference tournaments start tonight. The Horizon League begins tonight with games on campus sites. Not really anybody worthy of consideration to win this conference. Those teams will be in action next week. But it's crazy to think, man, the conference tournament time is here.
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was coming up, but, I was a little surprised the other day when I saw the Horizon was starting tonight, and, seeing that, some unique schedules where they're playing, and they're off multiple days in between. Conference tournaments, probably, if you're a professional bettor in college basketball, at least that week where there's game after game after game, it's probably, the most profitable week you can have. As far as getting after it, just because lines, it can be soft. They're not posted until usually game day and whatnot. And you can get very unique handicapping spots for certain teams. I'm glad to see it's here. I don't necessarily have a big bet in any of the 4 games tonight in the Horizon League, but I'll be certainly happy starting next week as more tournaments start up to have some bets and hopefully some winners for you guys, the listeners.
Well, and a mutual friend of ours, Rolf Michaels, who does a phenomenal job over at Wager Talk, he put out on his Twitter feed, and that's at CalSportsLV, a schedule, a color-coded schedule, in fact, for the conference tournaments, for the start date, the day of the finals, all that kind of thing. Really, really helpful guide. I love when he puts that out. I tweeted that reply to him, then he emailed me a copy. Ralph's a great guy over there. But the Horizon is Thursday. America East plays Saturday and Sunday. The Big South, looks like they actually pushed their start back to Tuesday. They were supposed to start this weekend, but I think they have some COVID issues going on there. But next Wednesday, the A-Sun, the Atlantic 10, and the Ohio Valley Conference. So we won't talk again until next Thursday. So we might as well tackle this for a couple minutes here. I know that we talked last year about this, and for new listeners under the ATS umbrella, Brad doesn't do a whole lot in terms of conference tournament futures. In terms of picking a winner before the tournament, kind of playing around with all that stuff. But the interesting thing about these conference tournaments, and of course this year it's even magnified to a degree, is that you've usually got at least 2 data points between the 2 teams that are playing each other.
Yeah.
And in some conferences this year, it may be upwards of 4 or 5. So how does that impact your conference tournament handicapping on a game-by-game basis?
Great question. I mean, this is more for a typical season, that whole standard. And it's tough to beat a team 3 times in one season. Don't fall, prey into that. It's actually not, but a lot of people do fall into that hole. So be careful with that when you see some of these matchups in the tournament. Maybe I might get involved. I'll give you one future that might come up. Ohio Valley. Eastern Illinois is a team to keep an eye out that might be dangerous. I know Belmont overwhelmingly is the team to beat in that conference, but Eastern Illinois is a team in the Ohio Valley that I'm looking to play on. Horizon, the number one seed for Pete's sake is, I've seen some places where Cleveland State's like 10-1. I think a small little wager on Cleveland State that's been red hot and generally exceeded expectations wouldn't be necessarily bad there in the horizon. But I guess from a standpoint, what I'm looking to take advantage of, especially the conference tournaments that play back to back to back days. Not breaking news here, but as you go along in the tournament, unders, semifinals, and championship games, overwhelmingly, as you move along, you generally get lower scoring. Game means more, especially for the one bid leagues, where it's basically win or go home. That people slow down tempos. Every possession matters. Defensive, intensity that goes up. But then again, if you're playing 3 games in 3 days, your outside jump shots not necessarily hitting at your normal rate. So my favorite bets are usually unders in the semifinals and finals.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And we'll talk about a lot of this stuff on Monday with Kyle Hunter, but also, you're talking about, generally speaking, neutral site venues, different shooting backdrops, different sight lines.
Empty arenas for the most part now, too. I think that's a negative.
Yeah, I think so, too. And also, too, you've got some conference tournaments that have been moved to different places just because fans are actually allowed to enter the building in some of those. Like I know the A-Sun, for example, they're actually doing their conference tournament down in Florida. I think it's in Jacksonville, and then also another.
So they're going to allow fans. Okay.
Yeah. So some of them will be allowing fans, and some of them won't be. And you're going to have some different venues than we're accustomed to, and it's just, to me, I really like the conference tournament element, and I've mentioned this on a couple of shows already. Where, and I know this sounds sacrilegious, but to me, I think conference tournament betting is way better than March Madness betting. I think it's just easier to make money in the conference tournaments where you've got some data points, you've got some decent sample sizes with these neutral sites and all of that. When March Madness rolls around, you get a bunch of teams that never play each other. You got a bunch of teams that may have really contrasting styles. You have a bunch of teams that could be kind of high variance in nature, especially some of the mid-majors and low majors that won auto bids. Give me conference tournaments, man, over March Madness, at least from a betting standpoint.
That's not even sacrilegious. That's just straight up truth. That's the gospel truth that's, more profitable. And don't believe me, see how much you can get down on a conference tournament game compared to an NCAA tournament game. I'm the one caveat I would say sometimes that the NIT, CBI, CIT tournaments are, I would put them more in the category of conference tournaments. But, no question that those smaller tournaments and conference tournaments way more advantageous to get after than an NCAA tournament game. And again, when bookies are scared, when they don't, allow you to bet a significant amount, that usually means that there's more profit. You can get down your biggest bets of the year on the NCAA tournament. To me, that means that there should be some of the sharper lines of the entire college basketball season.
Yeah, and we probably won't even get I think one of them's already been canceled. I think the CIT was already canceled, or the CBI, one of the two.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to get hardly any of those.
I don't think we get any of them, which is also another really interesting thing here too, because, now you start looking at questions of motivation for some of these teams of, do they want to go to the conference tournament? Will they even qualify for the conference tournament? Because not all these conferences take all of the teams in the league. So if you're a bottom feeder and you're in a conference that doesn't take everybody, do you give a shit at all in this COVID season with all these restrictions and protocols and all this kind of thing? I would say probably not. So I think we're going to run into some situations here going forward where there are just some enormous, embarrassing blowouts where teams just take advantage of other teams that don't want to be there.
Yep. I think, one team that I've been wanting to play on, Fairleigh Dickinson, I think their season now is pretty much over where they play in the Northeast Conference, but they've been relatively eliminated where their season's basically it's going to be over here shortly. I got to question their motivation. A team that I wanted to play on down the stretch now that they've been eliminated. I've just went from wanting to play on them to it's either fade or pass.
Yeah, it's so interesting too because again, I mean we're trying to play psychologist or psychiatrist here with these college age kids, and it's a very difficult thing to kind of figure out. And to use an example from last night, Stephen F. Austin I really wondered what the mindset would be for the Lumberjacks, who decided, you know what, let's just go ahead and take our postseason ban this year instead of having it next year. And the NCAA was like, yeah, sure, okay, whatever. So you wonder about Stephen F. Austin with these kids knowing, look, we're not going to the NCAA tournament. And this is a program that, that's kind of the standard, win that auto bid, go to the tournament, scare one of the, the high major teams and kind of go about your day. They were a 10-point favorite against Northwestern State, and they absolutely blew out Northwestern State in the second half of that game. They were up 9 at the break, won the second half by 17, won the game by 26, covered 10 easily. And that was a game where there was a significant motivation question on the Stephen F. Austin side. Seemingly they answered it, but that won't always be the case.
Yeah, I love, I'm a guy that, does a lot of motivation handicapping. As I get older and get more years under my belt, man, it's tough to really know for certain how motivated teams are. And especially as I remove myself further and further from my college years, I could tell you, I make college football because I got all week to speculate and whatnot. That's one thing. But when I'm dealing with 40 or 50 games a night to handicap, the motivation thing, it's tough to really get in the mindset of some of these college kids. I can paint a scenario where a lot of these teams, I got to almost see it first. Like, oh, okay, they don't have, maybe they have 2-3 games left on their season, nothing else to play for. I actually got to see them lay an egg before I really dive into it, man. I've come up short so many times trying to get in the heads of these kids.
Well, and Kiev O'Neill on yesterday's show that we talked with from the Odds Breakers mentioned Marquette, North Carolina, and sort of talked about, not a good spot for North Carolina. They're trying to find their way through the ACC, try to position themselves to get into the tournament some way, somehow. They get another one of these non-conference games dumped on them, and they did really well in the first one against Northeastern. Yep. They did not do well last night against Marquette. Clearly not ready to play. Marquette was. Now, of course, that's a significant outlier being a non-conference game, but if you can pinpoint those spots where motivation is going to be a bit of a question, I think it's just such like you said, it's a tough nut to crack because, every team is going to be different. It kind of depends on the coaching. Is there senior leadership there, or are there kind of a lot of young kids where there is no guy that takes charge? I don't know, man. I don't really know exactly how to kind of figure it all out, but it is just part of the handicapping process.
It is. And I loved getting into it for years and years and years. I've lost so many thinking that I for sure knew a team was going to lay an egg or question their motivation. And it hasn't been positive EV for me over the years. Just put it that way. At least probably more in hoops. Football, I think it's a little easier because, again, I got all week to kind of speculate. And plus, you can kind of see tea leaves reading them if you're looking at coaches' comments, players' comments, and whatever. But again, I don't know. And a COVID season is totally different. So maybe we do see teams that wave the white flag and examples. One tonight that I think is very unique. Yeah, I think Western Kentucky's extremely motivated against Houston. It's one of these non-conference matchups. How motivated is Houston to blow out Western Kentucky? If we want to play the motivation game, Western Kentucky would be one of those, big dogs that I think is going to be extremely motivated. And Houston playing a non-conference game, I'm not sure that they could really care less.
Yeah, I think that's a good one there to take a look at for sure. And, I think that as well, we're going to start getting some of that price inflation on those teams that are on the bubble, those teams that people feel like are in must-win situations, all of that. And realistically speaking, you're in a must-win situation because you're not all that good. So that's why you have that sense of urgency. You're back against the wall, so on and so forth. And those narrative-based things do drive up the line, do drive up the market price. But again, you're laying an inflated number on a team that probably doesn't deserve to be laying it.
Yeah, and again, I just say it out loud. You're paying a premium on a team that is in a must-win. An extra. You could say, must win. They're going to be extremely motivated, but a lot of times that creates added pressure. Hey, we got to win tonight, man. Otherwise, we're done. So you're paying a premium on a team why are they on the bubble? Because they're an inconsistent team. They're not very good to begin with. It just, to me, doesn't scream, positive EV. And, bet it early, because if everyone's going to want to bet on that team, that I'm okay with that, betting as early as possible. But if you're betting a couple hours before tip on one of those teams that's in must-win mode because they're on the bubble, that isn't for me, Adam.
Sounds like you took a piece of Western Kentucky tonight in that game, 749, 750. Line has come down a little bit. Looks like 12 was the predominant opener, seeing some 11s kind of pop up out there. What else are you looking at for tonight, or any thoughts on a look ahead into the weekend?
I really like Eastern Illinois tonight. Probably my favorite play of the last few days. And I already kind of mentioned them. I think it's a sneaky value as far as that team moving forward. And the reason being, this is an Eastern Illinois team that's had 20 different starting lineups in their 25 games this year. I mean, there was a stretch where Eastern Illinois was probably the worst team in the country against the spread. I mean, they went 8 straight games where they not only lost them, but they failed to cover the number. But in a majority of those games, they were playing without 4 of their 5 starters. Now that they've gotten, everybody back, how have they done? I mean, they have pulled an outright upset as a 15-point underdog and as a 7-point underdog their last 2 games. Now that they've gotten their entire lineup. I mean, this was a team that was supposed to be a top 4 team in the OVC. They played like it the first, 10 games, pretty much like an average team. Then they got decimated and had that stretch in January where, again, they lost and failed to cover 8 straight games. And then since guys have been starting to come back to the lineup, they're back to playing at a much better level. I mean, they're laying, it's tough laying points with a team that's been relatively bad, but I'm here to say that they're not a bad team when healthy. So Eastern Illinois, I not only think you can make some money with them, hopefully tonight, a -5.5, but I think this is a team that you can make money moving forward throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and probably a good point to end on here is that, when you look at the Ken Palms and the Torviks and the Haslametrics of the world,
Yep.
I mean, this season has just been so strange where, these teams have had either long COVID pauses that have certainly affected them when they come back, being rusty, having some bad data points, stuff like that, but also just simply losing players to injury and to COVID and, all these other different things that sometimes all that stuff's not really accounted for. So maybe this is the time of the year, if these teams are getting healthier heading towards the postseason. Sounds like you've isolated one there with Eastern Illinois, but I'm sure if people dig deep enough, there are others as well.
Certainly. And always check the schedule as far as teams coming off the COVID pause. Anything more than 2 weeks, if you're betting on that team, it's an extremely negative bet. I have been almost all of my handicapping here in the last few weeks have been fading teams off long COVID pauses. The longer, the worse it is. So anything 15 plus days, big time negative. Make sure you're always checking the schedule for that. If you want to avoid a negative EV bet, make sure you're not betting, for example, Nevada tomorrow night on a Friday night, they're coming off a long COVID pause. I would not want to have a Nevada ticket. I'm not saying that Utah State is a big time value bet, but I would eliminate a Nevada ticket from my card.
Professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. First and foremost, man, I appreciate your flexibility. I know I pushed the show back trying to get the guide up, so thank you so much for hopping on the show, being flexible with the recording time here. What's going on over at the website right now?
Yeah, just BradPowersSports.com is the website. If you want FCS information, you want college basketball information, got some packages up there. My spring football newsletter will be out in a few weeks. That'll give an early look, early power ratings, early thoughts on the FBS. Again, that'll come out, I think, March 15th. So you can check out the site. You can download all past issues. You want to see power ratings and whatnot. That can be for free to see what I'm all about. But make sure you're checking out BradPowersSports.com.
And as always, make sure you follow Brad on Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7. Brad, appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks for having me, man.
There you go. There's Brad Powers again, professional bettor and handicapper over at BradPowersSports.com. So as I said, I'm going to fly solo probably on Friday here. Maybe I'll find a guest, but probably fly solo, do a quick show here covering some quick bullet points from my MLB betting guide, talking some NBA, NHL, and some college basketball as we head on into the weekend. And then, of course, next week, lots of conference tournament coverage coming your way on the show, beginning with that Monday podcast with Kyle Hunter. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Head over to ATS.io, check out the MLB betting guide, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.